Hello and welcome. I'm Darren, and today we're going to follow on a little bit from where we were the other day. Not so much between the 7900 XTX and the 4080, but kind of a follow-up to probably a lot of the comments that do come up a lot. To start this video, I'm going to say a couple of things, just in case, because there have obviously been some new subscribers to the channel. So I want to make a couple of things clear. I like to consider myself as not a fanboy of any particular brand. However, when you are used to using a brand and you have a preferred brand that you've used for a few generations, it is hard not to hold some bias. So I'm not going to lie and say I won't be biased in some ways. Like for instance, even on like my NVIDIA GPUs, I've used MSI GPUs and I've used MSI motherboards probably for the last, since 12th gen, so no, since 11th gen. Since 11th gen Intel and 20 series. I'm not going to say that's all I've used. I have built PCs, quite a lot of PCs in the past couple of years. I've built some and sold some, so I've probably built about 25 PCs, water-cooled PCs, blah, 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 blah. But anyway, so if that makes me an MSI fanboy, because I actually quite like MSI motherboards and GPUs, that's fine. I am biased towards them because I've used them and they've served me quite well. So when it comes to the whole AMD versus NVIDIA thing, I have, from my use in the past couple of years of the 6800 XT, which was the first time I'd used AMD in quite a long time, and then obviously the 7900 XTX, which I have running at this moment in time on my sim racing rig in the other room. I still have run NVIDIA GPUs at the same time as having those GPUs, and I have still held a preference through those generations over NVIDIA for my own needs. That doesn't mean that, as I said in the previous video, that doesn't make AMD or NVIDIA better. You know, it's down to that personal. It's a personal thing. And it's what you need in a GPU. So, you know, obviously we're going to talk about VRAM a bit more in this video. And what I will say is, for the price that you can buy a 7900 XTX with 24 gigabytes of VRAM, if VRAM is important to you, go and buy one. And I honestly mean that. And probably the main reason I honestly mean that is because they're not making them anymore. And AMD, as far as we're aware, will not be making 24 gigabyte GPU in their next generation. We don't know if NVIDIA will be making 24 gigabyte GPU. As far as we know at the minute, we've got a 16 gigabyte 5080 and a 32 gigabyte 5090, and we don't even know how much that's going to cost. We're going to go probably a bit more into that because that's given me some different thoughts. But anyway, if you need 24 gigabytes of VRAM, and I know obviously high VRAM allocations are important for different reasons, and it's not obviously just for gaming, but in gaming you might need it for virtual reality. You might need it because you like to heavily module games, or I believe maybe I don't run triple screens on my sim racing rig because I don't have room for triple screens. Now, whether that uses more VRAM, I can kind of guess it does. How much, I don't know. But if you need, obviously, a high amount of VRAM for something like that, then the 24 gigabytes that you get for the price of the 7900 XTX, you are not going to get a better deal than that. So, and those will be, as far as I'm aware, those aren't in production any longer. So what's on the shelves? How much backup stock that is going to get replaced, I don't know, but I believe that those have gone out of production. So if that means something, if that is very important to you, then absolutely that is a great card for that price. For me, like I said, I don't have the high need for it. whilst I don't really want to be in a position where I run out of VRAM, it's not the end of the world to me. I don't mind. It's not a big deal. I'm not going to break down if I have to drop from Ultra or Ultra Plus to high. And that is something that gets me through an outlying game. So that doesn't mean much to me. If it means something to other people and you're worried, because obviously the other problem is obviously VRAM lower down the stack is way more important at certain levels, if you know what I mean. Obviously, mid-range NVIDIA GPUs like the 8 gigabytes. I mean, that is bullshit. There is no justifying it. 8 gigabytes in 2024, in 2022, is bullshit. I'm not going to justify that. I don't think anyone probably should. At the same time, there are probably people that use those cards at 1080p, probably play CSGO and play on low settings, and they do not care. It doesn't matter to them. So everyone plays different. And when I'm talking about, obviously, these situations, I play at 4K. So I'm also using the 4080 and the 7900 XTX. So we're talking higher up the stack. Probably another really bad decision from NVIDIA, which was bullshit again, was the 4070 Ti with 12 gigabytes. The 12 gigabytes on that GPU nerfed it, and the 16 gigabyte version proved that, because that GPU was powerful enough to play 4K, and the 12 gigabytes nerfed it from being able to, in not every game, but in some games it nerfed it. So it wasn't a case of the GPU wasn't powerful enough and it didn't matter about the VRAM. The VRAM did hold it back in certain situations at 4K. Now, when you drop a bit further down the stack, if you're buying a 4070 or a 4070 Super and you're wanting to play 4K at that, I'm going to say you're being over-realistic, but at the same time, it's not that it's not doable. It just means that you're going to be dropping settings. I've played with the 4070 Super. I think I've got probably a couple of videos of a few games where I played with the 4070 Super at 4K just to actually see how it performed. I had to drop a few settings. I had to use some DLSS and all the rest of it, but it was playable and it actually looked pretty damn good in the games I played. Now, there are games that are outliers that it's just not going to do. Like I said, I think that's probably optimistic. To me, that is a 1440p card. But obviously, my original video was about the 4080 and the 7900 XTX, and the biggest outlier between those GPUs, the biggest glaring difference between those two GPUs is the VRAM. So obviously, one 16 gigabyte, one 24 gigabyte, and it's the biggest kind of... It's probably within the responses I've had within the video, or what I see in other responses, Facebook, Reddit, all the rest of it, the most of the arguments that are born between the 4080 or 4080 Super, whatever you want to be, and the 7900 XTX, the biggest argument between those is the VRAM. And I'm going to kind of go through probably a few of the comments. Now, I am not an expert in any way, shape or form over hardware. I don't pretend to be, and my advice to you isn't listen to me. My advice to anyone watching this that's looking at buying a GPU is do your research, figure out what you want. So figure out what resolution that you want to play with. That's the biggest key, because a resolution is what eats up VRAM more than anything else. So obviously you need more VRAM for 4K over what you do for 1440p, and obviously you need more VRAM for 1440p over what you do at 1080p. And then obviously the higher the actual kind of graphical textures you need, the more VRAM. Things like frame generation on NVIDIA do add to VRAM, and then you have ray tracing that will also add to VRAM. It's not always a huge amount, but it can be an extra couple of gig by the time you've got obviously frame generation and path tracing on, or something like that. We'll go through that in some of the graphs in a bit. But my biggest advice to you is figure out what resolution you're playing at. Obviously, figure out your budget. Look at what you're looking at, but do not listen to fanboys. because fanboys are the biggest spreader of misinformation. And the problem with the biggest hardcore, I'm not saying all fanboys, because there are levels to a fanboy, you know what I mean? But obviously, the biggest problem is you'll get people that will follow the fanboys, and then you'll get this tribal mentality going on where people are echoing what is already not technically right, and people will echo it as truth, and they don't even know what they're saying. And you see the exact same thing in the political landscape, the same as what we've just seen probably through the US elections between Trump and Harris, where you can get, you can ask 10 people why they hate Donald Trump, and all they know is he's bad and he's orange. And they don't know the reason why, they just know that they've been told to hate him, so that's the reason why. And this is the exact same mentality that goes throughout the kind of fanboy, hardcore AMD fanboys versus the NVIDIA hardcore fanboys. Do you know what I mean? They'll come out with their reasons that you have to buy the certain GPU, and it might not be quite correct, or it might not give you all the information that you actually need, but it will be echoed and argued, and you can find yourself completely lost by what's going on. I find it quite painful at times, if I'm being honest. So VRAM is the biggest one. Now, I've seen some comments, and I'm not going to say this is wrong, but what I'm going to say is the way that the comment is put across isn't quite the same way that I personally would see it. But that doesn't mean I'm right, because obviously we don't know where games are going to go in the future. We don't know if games are going to continue to use more VRAM. For all we know, Unreal Engine 6 might launch. It might be the best engine in the world, and it might use half the VRAM that the engines before it have used. Is that likely? Probably not, but we don't know that. So we always obviously think the constant comment is that we will be using forever and ever more VRAM until I don't know whatever happens. And the biggest comment that I get is people saying that they bought the 24 gigabyte GPU because it will last longer. Now, we're going to kind of go through. I did kind of like a screenshot thing, and I put some extra kind of information next to it, but it's come out a bit blurry. We'll kind of get through it for a bit because it didn't work out exactly how I wanted, but we'll kind of check it out and then we'll go from there. But anyway, so I downloaded this screenshot before, and unfortunately it's come out really blurry by the time I've gone through CapCut. But anyway, this was the last game to be obviously benchmarked on Tech Power Up. And what I wanted to go through was the idea that the higher the VRAM you have, the longer your GPU will last. Now, what I will say is, and what I've tried to reply to those people is, the most powerful cards of the generation are generally the ones with the highest amount of VRAM on. The fact that they lasted longer and the fact that they still last longer isn't necessarily down to the amount of VRAM those GPUs had. It's down to the fact that they were the most powerful cards in their class in that generation. And this is how I was obviously struggling to put it across to people. So we're going to go through it here, and the 3090 is the prime example. So if we look through here, obviously you can see down this benchmark. Now this is a 4K. This is obviously Stalker 2. You can see down here that we have the 3080. I don't know how it was. So yeah, 3070. So we're in order of how these were when obviously they were the GPU of the generation. So 3070 still where it should be, 3080 where it should be, 3090 where it should be, and the 3090 Ti where it should be. Now, the reason that the 3090 Ti is still ahead of, say for instance in this situation, the 3080, isn't actually necessarily down to the fact that it had 24 gigabytes of VRAM, because this game uses in this setting under 10 gigabytes of VRAM. So had the 3090 in this situation only had 10 gigabytes of VRAM, it would still be in this exact place, and the 3080 would still be in this exact place, and that's because it was more powerful. As we can see, the actual fact that it's got 24 gigabytes of VRAM isn't that meaningful in this game, because a 12 gigabyte VRAM card, a 16 gigabyte VRAM card, another 16 gigabyte VRAM card, and another 16 gigabyte VRAM card are all performing higher than it. So it's not down to the fact that it was carrying 24 gigabytes of VRAM that has made it more relevant at this point. The fact that it's more relevant at this point is because it was the most powerful GPU in its generation. It was a 90 class GPU. So it's still performing better than some of the 70 class GPUs that came from the generation behind it. That's totally acceptable, and that is generally what normally happens. Obviously, when we get down to, like, you know, saying that, this is a bit of a rough one, because we're actually seeing the 8 gigabyte 4060 Ti perform better than the 16 gigabyte. So that's interesting. I'd imagine that's kind of margin of error. So I'd imagine VRAM, and saying that, no, that should be, I don't know, I can't remember exactly. No, I think that it was actually saying it was allocating 9 at this settings, so it probably wasn't actually using, it might have been within the 8 gigabytes, I'm not sure. But anyway, regardless. Now the other thing that obviously comes up is the memory bus. That comes up quite a lot. So obviously we've gone through it here as well, because there is obviously a lot of talk that if it has a cut down memory bus, then it won't perform. And again, just for like sanity's sake, obviously you can see down this graph, I've put down obviously the bus width size. And you can see here that there are plenty of situations, like I said, this is at 4K, where even a 192-bit bus is performing better than a 384-bit bus, or a 320-bit bus, or a 256-bit bus, so on and so forth. Obviously 256-bit buses here operating higher than 384-bit buses or 320-bit buses. So that the bus width isn't a complete indication on its own. If someone says to you, no, that's got a smaller bus, it won't perform as well, that's not all the information that you need. That isn't the only deciding factor. There's a lot of other factors in there. There's obviously architectural changes, there's different use of caches, which will obviously hold memory, which will obviously, you know, change the way that the memory is allocated through the bus. There's a lot more to it than just a simple, that's got a lower bus, it won't perform as well. As we can see at 4K, this is obviously at 4K. And I chose this game because nothing in this changes. In the 1% lows, these stay in this order, and through 1440p and 1080p, these GPUs all stay in this same order, I think, to a degree. I don't think there's anything, there might be a couple of changes, maybe down at the lower end, but at the top end, on this benchmark, they all stay in the same order. So it's not like a resolution changes, or because suddenly at a higher resolution you're going up a higher FPS and then suddenly this changes. This doesn't seem to be, I'm not going to say this isn't always the case, but what I'm going to say is don't always take what someone tells you as all of the facts that you need. I'm not saying that they're not wrong in certain ways. Obviously, you can see the higher bit buses are still going to outperform on a most part a lower. But that's not the whole story. That's not everything that matters. And obviously, as you can see here, VRAM matters when you run out. When you don't run out, it's not obviously necessarily the thing that matters. Performance is what matters. How powerful your GPU is before VRAM comes into the equation. And then, like I said, in the 16 gigabyte 4070 Ti, not in this game. This game obviously isn't a reason for it. The 16 gigabyte is obviously outperforming it because the 16 gigabyte did also get, obviously you could see it did get a bigger memory bus, but it also got an uplift in, I believe, bandwidth, and I think it got a memory, like a clock speed and whatever else. So it wasn't just a case of all of these things. However, obviously, it's got a bigger bus because it's got more memory to go on the bus. It's not just a case of they're both 12 gigabyte, this got a bigger bus and that made it faster. It had to have more memory put on it, which meant that it had to have a bigger bus to go with it. So that's one of the things that I want to go through. And then if we go to, so obviously we can go here and we can kind of go through a similar thing with obviously, other benchmarks. Like I said, it's not a big deal, but they're all kind of very similar in, we'll go to like, say, God of War Ragnarok. I think this is a relatively old game, probably not one of the best games to go for, actually. So this is a good place to come. And the reason that this is probably, I don't know how many places source actual VRAM usage. What I will say is, for Tech Power Up, if you're still kind of worried about VRAM usage, read the conclusion at the end, because a lot of the time they talk about VRAM in that and how they are reporting VRAM, because I believe the way that they allocate these numbers is by the amount of VRAM that's allocated, not by the actual amount of VRAM that's used. And in some games that can be quite a big factor, because there are a few games on certain engines that will take 90% of the VRAM that you have available on your GPU. Now, if you're only reporting what's being allocated and you're not reporting what's being used, you could look at that game and think, holy shit, this is taking 22 gigabytes of VRAM. Like, I believe Call of Duty will do that, if you have it available. So if you're running a 24 gigabyte GPU, I think it would take like 20, or it will take a percentage of what's available. Now, it will probably only use like 5, but it will take it. And that can obviously give you a wrong indication of exactly what's going on. Now, Tech Power Up are quite good at writing in their analysis at the end. I believe they normally put in the conclusion about what is actually happening with the VRAM. Yeah, so generally they'll tell you in there if it's an engine that's taking a lot more than what it's actually using, just in case you're not aware of it. So kind of that's out the way. Now, the next thing that kind of had me thinking a little bit about the next generation of GPUs and what is going to happen with VRAM, because like I said at the start, we're kind of in a situation where the XTX is, as far as I'm aware, I could be wrong, check on it, in case you are wanting to buy one, obviously double check your sources. But I believe the XTX has gone out of production. So I believe it's a case of what's left in stock. Once it's gone, it's gone. That obviously doesn't mean that you're not going to get second-hand XTXs, but I'd probably say if the XTXs are by people that probably want to stick on the AMD platform for a reason, they might not have a reason to be selling them off for an upgrade, obviously, in the next generation, because I'm not sure, obviously, until we see it, if the 9070 XT, I believe, is the new possible name. I'm not sure if that's going to be of any competition to the XTX, which is going to give people that obviously already own an XTX a reason to upgrade. So unless they end up moving to NVIDIA, or unless the XTX, or unless the 9070 XT gives them, has some sort of proprietary, if FSR4 is locked into it, or if the ray tracing uplift is quite big and the power reduction is quite big, and that matters to maybe some people with the XTX, they might kind of happily lose a bit of performance to kind of gain back different performance in a different way. Who knows? But like I said, if that's the case, XTX, let's say that's gone. So next generation, as we know it of this moment, AMD will only be doing a 16 gigabyte GPU. If you look at the 5080 and the 5090, the difference is huge. So 5080, 16 gigabytes. So matching what obviously AMD are doing for the next generation, and then you have the 32 gigabyte 5090 off on the horizon on its own. And it's made me think, and I could be a long way off on this one, but I actually wonder if the 5090 is actually going to be sold. I mean, it's already obviously been spoken of as a professional card, but I actually wonder if they will price it out of gamers. As in, yes, it will outperform the 58. It will be the top performer in games. I'm not denying that. But I kind of wonder if they end up putting that card at a price where gamers aren't really going to bother with it. Now, I know obviously there's people that have got a shit ton of money that it's not going to bother them. But it kind of makes me wonder if Nvidia almost want to push that card away from gamers. As in, obviously, it will become the Titan class card with the 32 gigabytes of VRAM that clearly isn't made for gaming. You still have to take into consideration, you get a lot of UE5 games at the moment that 4K ultra settings are still below 10 gigabytes. 32 gigabytes isn't going in there for gaming. I'm not saying people won't find a way to use a lot of that VRAM in gaming. What I'm saying is they are not putting that in there solely for gaming. And it kind of makes me wonder if we end up in a situation where the next generation of GPUs, to most of the degree, are leveled off at 16 gigabytes of VRAM. And if that changes the games for the next couple of generations, or certainly for for the next year or two, while these obviously cards are within their generation, because yes, we have seen an outlier like the Indiana Jones, where obviously with everything cranked, it would go over that 16 gigabytes. Now, whether it needs to, that is kind of because other than that, and maybe the odd one or two. Now, I know people modding games. I understand that you have a difference. And then I understand, obviously, like I said, virtual reality, I'm not sure. And then triple screen use, again, I'm not sure. I can't speak on that because I'm not sure on those facts. But it kind of makes me wonder if developers take into account 16 gigabytes is your limit for the next generation of gaming. It's just a thought. We'll wait and see. I don't know. I kind of get a feeling by if these price leaks are anything like the way that they are coming through, certainly with the NVIDIA GPU, and the fact that they will be thinking, okay, AMD will only have a 16 gigabyte GPU, because our devs going to start making games to take up 18, 19, 20 gigabytes of VRAM when no current GPUs are hitting the market that can use that amount of VRAM. Our devs, I don't know. It's a thought in my mind that maybe NVIDIA, AMD, somewhere along the line will be saying to the game development, 16 gigabytes is your cutoff point, because I don't think that's kind of unreasonable. You see a lot of games that are well below, like the Indiana Jones game. It's a decent looking game, but it's nothing fucking groundbreaking. I've seen way better looking games using a lot less. So now, obviously, for certain games developed on certain engines, that might become a problem. They might be forced onto UE5, or I don't know. And then obviously we have the NVIDIA neural rendering. Now, I did hear a long time ago that AMD were working, I'm sure it was on a Daniel Owens video, I'm sure he actually said that AMD were possibly due to launch this before NVIDIA. I'm pretty sure that AMD are working on a new compression technique for obviously textures. It's not a new. I know people are obviously. I read a lot of comments. A lot of people are up in arms about it, but texture compression happens. We all have, all the games that we have at the moment use a texture compression. And Nvidia and AMD, I'm sure, don't use the exact same texture compression. I'm sure they have other ways that they do it. So it's just a new texture compression, obviously, technique. It's not like a oh my god, they keep doing all of this crazy stuff. We do use texture compression. So how or if that comes into play, if AMD already have something that they're coming out with, which will be a similar thing, that will maybe go into obviously this drop in VRAM usage. I don't know. I suppose, do consoles have a limit? I don't know. Is there a kind of limiting factor on a console where they're going to say, okay, if you keep putting too much VRAM in a console? I know obviously the whole architecture of how a console works is different, but obviously whether this would be something where it's going to make a console use too much power at the wall or something, I don't know. These are all I don't know things, but it was just a thought that came into my head. So I'm going to leave it there. Obviously, if this is probably a bit of a boring video, I apologise if you've obviously watched to the end. But I was just kind of, a lot of comments come up, and I wanted to kind of give my thoughts on it. Like I said, this isn't, don't take my word for it. What I'm saying is there's different ways of thinking than the stuff that's constantly shouted at you online by the comments that come at you saying you're wrong, I'm right, or whatever it is. So there's different ways to look at what you need, what you want, and what might work for you, rather than someone telling you what you have to have because it works better for them. So that ultimately means that it has to work better for you. And that's that. I'm going to end it there. So if you like, give me a like, and I'll catch you in the next one.